Hans Niemann really is different to other top players, not just in the way he carries himself, the things he says and does, but also in the chess he plays at the board. And this game is a great example of that. So he was playing black today in round one of the Sunway Sitges or Sitges, not quite sure how to say it, open tournament being played in Spain. Now his opponent was a lot weaker, but still, the way he dismantles in just 27 moves really highlights how he sees things differently. So let's have a look at this game, and just before I jump into it, I do want to quickly shout out Kay Alexander and Omar Pavel. Thanks very much for signing up for membership. It really is appreciated as I grow the channel. And if there's anyone watching right now does want to support, if you regularly view these videos, then check out the links below in case you want to do so. And of course, thanks very much for that support. So onto the game here. Hans has black. He kicks off here with c5, inviting a Sicilian defense if white goes e4. But instead g3 was played, and both players now go for a rock solid fianchetto of the bishops. And now we see white going for d4. So kind of like an open Sicilian here, but there's no pawn on e4. And I don't love the way white actually plays the opening, because the knight drops away now. We see knight to f6, knight c3, pawn d6, and after just 7 moves here, well, I'd say these knights really look a bit better than these knights, and white's not committed either of these pawns to the centre, so they've not really made the most of their opening advantage. Black's already equalised. So we see castle is now played, and this is where Hans really shows he's a bit different, goes his own way. So there's a game here from 1989, Kasparov with black, he just castles the king. But what does Hans do? He goes pawn h5. Very aggressive, chucking the rook's pawn. Now this is a different era. Computer analysis with strong engines has shown that you can chuck this rook's pawn, and often it's a very dynamic way to gain space, activate the rook. Okay. But even so, after pawn h4, which isn't the best by the way, better there for white was h3, preparing g4 if black goes h5, we see Hans carry on the aggressive attack in just a few moves. So he's had castles played now from Hans, bishop to g5, bishop e6 played, and now another positional mistake here from white, pawn to e4. Looks so natural to just gain that space, play the move mentioned earlier, but the problem here is the bishop's coming to c4. You've now opened up the attack on the rook, and this is uncomfortable. And we'll see why, because knight g4 is now played. You could have started with bishop c4, and it's all connected with the weakness of this pawn. So rook b1 was played, protecting this one, now preparing to move the knight to d5. But now we see bishop c4, kicks the rook, and this pawn is weakened, so Hans goes after it here, but not in the most conventional way. So the top engine moves here are queen b6, eyeing that pawn, or going a5, b5, gaining some space, then looking at those ideas. But Hans goes pawn to f6, really aggressive idea, just going after the king. And now white plays into the hands of this attack. So bishop e3 was best. Yes, you give the bishop pair if black wants it, but you cover f2, important point. Because after bishop f4, you're walking straight into this next move. Can you guess what Hans played? So here he goes pawn to g5, ripping open the position. And again, white makes a positional mistake. You have to now retreat this bishop. Although black can take, and this looks quite ugly, well, it's just the best of a bad position. You could take, or you could even go knight d2, hit the bishop, leave that pawn for a moment. The problem with what was played in the game of pawn takes on g5 is that you're now ripping open the f-file for the rook, and things get even worse here. Bishop e3 still best, by the way, after bishop takes on g5. Because now black is simply crashing through on f2. Maybe white thought they were getting a lot more counterplay here against this pawn after the knight d5 move in combination with the bishop, but actually it's just all black now. So the queen comes to f8. Very simple threat of rook takes on g2 check, king recaptures, and then the queen coming down to f2 and across to h2 to give mate. So that's why bishop e3 covers the f2 square, finally comes back to the square it should have been on originally, but now bishop h6 from hands. Great move, looking to overload this bishop. You can't go away because of the problems. So knight f4 was played, cutting the f-file, but now can you see the final move to really crush this attack here and just have a decisive advantage? So the move played by Hans Niemann was rook takes on g2 with check. Now the king recaptured, and then this is the follow-up, it's pawn to e5. The knight just hasn't got a good square, it can't cover this piece, so we see knight takes on h5, and now we see takes here with check. Rook recaptures forced, bishop takes, and now you're threatening to check here, and there's just no good thing for white to do now. I mean, say you go queen f3 to block this, well the problem is that black can simply exchange, king recaptures, and after this one retreats, well black's simply a minor piece up, completely one endgame. So we had queen g4 looking for some counterplay, the king sidestepped, but after check, king goes, now white goes for this one, desperate to move the knight, deliver some kind of mate, but black's crashing through first. Check forces the king to the h-file, and there's just no way to move the knight and the king all in one move, open a deadly check. So there's nothing better here after rook g8 from hands, cutting the king's escape, than to go queen takes on d6, looking to try and get some sort of checks going here if the bishop ever moves, but now we have the killer blow of bishop to f1 check, and here we see a resignation. Why? Well, if the king staggers up the board, there are different ways to win, but this is a nice one of rook takes on g3. Now it looks impossible because the knight can capture, but then you check from f4, the king can't retreat because of the bishop, staggers up like this, and you deliver mate. And if instead of capturing that rook, you actually throw in a check here, well now we block with a counter check, forces the queens off, and then we can actually deliver mate. Now the king's got no squares, so the knight has to block. Like this, using the power of these two bishops zigzagging up the board. So crushing attack there from Hans Niemann. He really sees the board differently to other players. If you enjoyed this one and want to see another fascinating game from him, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.